Hans Wilsdorf was born in 1881 in the southeastern part of Germany. The area where he was born is known as Kumbach, Bavaria. Wilsdorf's parents owned an iron toolmaker. However, when both of the parents died, and it was an early death, Wilsdorf's uncle and aunt winded up the business and sent Wilsdorf along with his siblings to boarding school. At that time, when Wilsdorf became an orphan, he was just 12 years old. During his time in boarding school, Wilsdorf worked tirelessly on his English speaking and writing skills. These skills would then ultimately help Wilsdorf in the business in the forthcoming time. Later in 1900, when Wilsdorf was around 19 years old, he decided to move to La Chaux de Fonds and then pursue watchmaking. While Wilsdorf was in Switzerland, he secured a job there and worked at a pocket watch company. The watch company was known as Kuno Korten. You won't believe it, but Wilsdorf was hired by them because of his excellent English skills. The company used to export products throughout the globe, and therefore they needed someone who could understand and communicate in English. It certainly proved to be a great work experience for Wilsdorf in the watch industry. Then in 1903, he left his job in Switzerland and moved to London. There, he used to import Swiss watches to the market of England by working for a local company. Now comes the time when Wilsdorf, along with his brother-in-law Alfred Davis, founded their own company in 1905 in London. Thanks to the several years of experience Wilsdorf had gaining working for different businesses, the company imported Swiss movements, placed them in British cases, and sold them to jewelers who personalized the dials with their own names. Wilsdorf created and acquired the brand name Rolex in 1908, after recognizing the opportunity for its own brand to flourish in the expanding wristwatch market. Those of you who don't know the meaning of Rolex, let me tell you that neither I nor anyone else knows its meaning. You'll be surprised to know that Hans Wilsdorf himself didn't know what Rolex meant. Interesting, right? Well, there is no meaning to the word Rolex by itself. Its name is the subject of several theories though. Wilsdorf, the owner of the brand, wanted the brand's name to be brief and simple to pronounce in all languages, which is the most commonly acknowledged reason. Hence, Rolex was chosen as the brand name. By 1910, Wilsdorf had a certificate proving his watches had the correct chronometric precision. He got this certificate directly from the official watch rating center in Switzerland, but this was a wristwatch certificate, not a pocket one. At that time, as soon as Wilsdorf's watches received a ratified certificate of chronometric performance, the company began to establish itself as one of the most prestigious names in the world. Not just that, but in 1914 as well, they received an A-class certificate in their precision test from the British Kew Observatory. Marine chronometers, the most precise timekeeping devices at the time, were only eligible for Class A certificates. With such a fantastic rating and compact movement and size fits into the wristwatch, Wilsdorf and his company were beginning to gain further popularity. Later in 1915, Wilsdorf, along with his brother-in-law, decided to change the company Davis and Wilsdorf's name to Rolex Watch Co. to honor their most prestigious and accurate watch. After World War I, Hans Wilsdorf relocated from England to Geneva in 1919 to avoid paying ridiculously high import taxes on the premium components the company required for their creation, which certainly was a great decision taking into account the situation at that time. Not only that, but it is also the place where he established Montres Rolex SA the following year. Another reason was to be nearer to his Bienne supplier. Geneva had a history of watchmaking and therefore had a solid international reputation in this regard. This brilliant decision by Wilsdorf shows his ability to think strategically. Sometimes, you need to make such important decisions, no matter how challenging they may seem. This will prove to be beneficial for your business in the long run. All of the entrepreneurs out there note this. Moving on, in 1926, when Hans Wilsdorf was around 45 years old, the company developed the first Rolex Oyster case. It was the first ever dustproof and waterproof watch ever made. One thing that changed the name for Rolex was the invention of the Oyster case. It is the cornerstone of today's Rolex. Now, there was one issue with the first ever waterproof watch, but with his amazing marketing skills and excellent tactics, Wilsdorf solved this problem as well. Actually, at that time, People were not able to believe and weren't getting convinced that a watch could work properly even after getting in contact with water. Now, in order to convince the people that the new Rolex watch was truly waterproof, Wilsdorf started to display the watches immersed in fish tanks. In fact, he gave one to Mercedes Gleitz, who was the first ever woman to swim the English Channel. It was certainly astounding for the public at that time to witness the watch working perfectly without any issue, even after she finished the 10-hour challenge. In the year 1930, Wilsdorf and his company created the logo. It was the classic 5-pointed crown. Wilsdorf was a man who never settled for the less. He was a highly ambitious person and a far-sighted businessman, and therefore, in the early 1930s, Wilsdorf began to put a lot of emphasis on quality and the image of the brand. Even though Rolex had already won numerous awards, he thought that quality was certainly the only way to demonstrate the integrity of his brand. He was absolutely convinced about protecting Rolex's reputation and the standing it had already achieved in the watch business. It was for this reason that various iconic watches were created by Rolex under the guidance of Wilsdorf. Ultimately, in 1931, the Oyster Perpetual was born. It was the first wristwatch with an automatic winding mechanism. This meant that people now did not need to wind their watches every now and then just for the sake of keeping them running. It was indeed a demonstration of the great innovation of that time by Wilsdorf. In fact, all of the automatic watches you see today are certainly based on this idea. The company and Wilsdorf didn't stop there. They continued their innovation, and then in 1945, the world saw the birth of the first ever automatic watch with a date feature. It was a Rolex Datejust. Most famous personalities of that time chose to wear Rolex Datejust because of its fantastic style and elegance. The watch became one of the most iconic watches ever developed by Rolex. The brilliance and innovative mind of Hans Wilsdorf that made Rolex super successful. Due to his outstanding innovations and inventions, Hans Wilsdorf made Rolex rise to the top of the watch industry. It was his brilliant marketing strategies that ultimately proved to be a factor that made Rolex a successful brand. One instance that we discussed before as well of Mercedes Gleitz swimming in the English Channel while wearing an oyster case for 10 hours. As Wilsdorf has promised, she wore the watch around her neck and it didn't leak. Wilsdorf advertised in the newspaper using Mercedes Gleitz's testimony about the success of the oyster case in an effort to shine a spotlight on that accomplishment. He promoted Rolex in this way, and it quickly became the most sought-after watch brand in the world. Although Wilsdorf implemented a number of other marketing techniques, the point here is to emphasize Wilsdorf's innovation and smartness. He now brilliantly took advantage of the opportunities to promote Rolex. Here is a message for you if you own a business and want to make it successful and simultaneously popular as well. Hans Wilsdorf died in 1960, and by that time, Rolex was already a well-established business. In fact, the brand was known for its excellence, opulence, and elegance. One great thing that Wilsdorf did before his death was create the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation in 1945. Interestingly, the foundation later on became the owner of the Rolex company. Wilsdorf was not only a great innovator and brilliant businessman, but at the same time, he was a wonderful philanthropist as well. The foundation that Wilsdorf created donates a lot of money to children's charities each year throughout the globe. This tells us about the vision of a great man like Hans Wilsdorf. Alright folks, that's the end of today's video. We hope you got something valuable to learn from this video about the history of Hans Wilsdorf and how he made Rolex the #1 watch brand in the world. We want to be the first in the field, and Rolex should be seen as the one and only the best. Hans Wilsdorf.